I didn't wake up one day and decide my family didn't value me. That's not how it happens. It happens in inches. It happens in the birthday photo where you're the one who got cropped out because you made a weird face and nobody thought to take another shot. It happens in the report card that gets a nod while your sister's C's get a party. It happens at the dinner table when your father looks past you and calls someone else the heartbeat of this family, and you're sitting 2 feet away, holding a dish you spent 3 hours cooking, waiting to be seen. For years, I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself I was imagining it, exaggerating it, being too sensitive. So I did what a lot of us do when we feel like we don't quite belong. I tried to earn my place. I became the daughter who never missed a birthday, who drove 2 hours to fix a laptop, who quietly paid a medical bill so nobody else would have to. I told myself it was love, and some of it was. But if I'm honest, the honesty I never let myself have back then, part of me was hoping that if I gave enough, they'd finally learn to give it back. They never did, because it was never a lesson they needed to learn. It was a pattern, and patterns don't change just because you keep showing up for them. They only change when you stop. That's where this story starts. Not in a hospital room, not with a phone call to a bank. It starts years earlier in 100 small moments that taught me exactly where I stood, long before I was finally ready to believe it. 3 years before any of this came to a head, my parents called me in a panic. Not my sister, me. My father's business had taken a hit, the mortgage payments had fallen behind, and the bank was already using words like default. My mother's voice cracked on the phone in a way I'd almost never heard. We could lose the house. And my father, a man who rarely let himself sound small, got on the line and said, "I'm ashamed to even be asking you this." And just like that, every birthday I'd been cropped out of, every dinner where I got the nod and someone else got the party, it all evaporated. Because in that moment I wasn't thinking about years of being overlooked. I was thinking about how to fix it. That's what I'd always done. $47,000. That wasn't spare change sitting in an account somewhere. That was almost everything my husband and I had saved. 6 years of renting, watching the market climb further out of reach. 4 years of packed lunches and canceled vacations and weekend freelance work, all of it handed over in a single check. I didn't say yes right away. I talked to my husband first, because it was our future, not just mine. He's careful, methodical, an accountant by nature, and he said something I've never forgotten. If we're doing this, we do it properly. Paperwork, terms, not just a handshake and a hope. So we did it right. A real promissory note, a recorded lien, and one clause tucked in near the bottom that I barely paid attention to at the time. An acceleration clause, a quiet little provision that said if the trust behind this loan was ever broken, I could call the entire balance due, immediately, on my word alone. I didn't think I'd ever need it. I just thought I was helping my parents keep their house. I had no idea I was also, without knowing it, writing myself an exit. 2 years into that loan I got pregnant. And it wasn't an easy pregnancy, not even close. There were complications from the start, a placenta that wasn't sitting right, blood pressure that kept climbing when it shouldn't have. By week 34, I was on full bed rest, and my doctor told me plainly, this is very likely gonna end in emergency C-section, and when it happens, it needs to happen fast. I told my parents everything. Not because I wanted sympathy, because some part of me wanted them ready, wanted them present, and they said all the right words. Of course we'll be there. Just stay calm, we've got you. I believed them, because believing them had become a reflex I never thought to question. At the same time, my sister announced her own pregnancy, and I watched my parents throw themselves into planning her baby shower with an energy I had genuinely never seen aimed at anything of mine. Group chats about venues, mood boards for centerpieces. My mother drove 90 minutes to a specialty bakery because the frosting wasn't the exact right shade of pink. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I told myself, surely, when it actually matters, medical will outweigh a party. Surely, it happened 3 weeks early, a Thursday. My blood pressure spiked, and within hours I was being prepped for emergency surgery. I called my mother, hands already shaking, and told her it's happening now, can you come? And in the background of that call, I heard laughter, glasses clinking, someone mentioning a diaper cake. We drove 90 minutes for this bakery order, she said. You'll be fine. You always make things sound worse than they are. My father gave me the exact same wall, so I called my best friend instead. And 40 minutes later, she was the one holding my hand in that hospital room. Not blood, not family by any legal definition, but the only person who showed up when it counted. During surgery, things went wrong. My blood pressure crashed. I heard my surgeon's voice go sharp. She's losing more than we'd expect. We need to move now. And then everything went dark. I woke up to my husband's face, still in his travel clothes, eyes red from a flight he'd sprinted off of. He told me later that my surgeon had pulled him aside and said another 20 minutes of delay could have had serious consequences. Close. That word sat in my chest for days. Close to never meeting my daughter. Close to my husband raising her alone. While my parents were 90 minutes away, eating cake, admiring centerpieces, because a party felt more urgent than her daughter's operating table. The next morning my parents walked into my hospital room like nothing had happened. A gift bag. A stuffed rabbit smiles, like the night before had been some minor inconvenience instead of a night I nearly didn't survive. My mother cooed over the baby, admired her hair, and then spent 5 full minutes telling me how well the shower had gone, how the frosting turned out exactly the right shade after all. She said it the way you'd describe a nice weekend. No hesitation. No sense that she was saying this to the daughter who'd been fighting for her life across town while she watched someone cut a cake. I finally found my voice and asked why they hadn't come, and my father said the sentence that ended something in me for good. Winona, you always make everything about you. Your sister needed us for something we couldn't reschedule. You were going to be fine. You're the strong one, remember. The strong one. I'd heard that phrase my whole life. It always sounded like a compliment. It never was. Being the strong one meant I wasn't allowed to need anyone. It meant my emergencies could be rescheduled around someone else's centerpieces. It meant that even nearly dying on an operating table came with a footnote. But you always make it about yourself. I looked at my father's face while he said it. I waited for some flicker of doubt, some small recognition of how that sentence sounded out loud in a hospital room, with my daughter still in my arms. There wasn't one. He believed every word of it. And that's when I understood. This was never about one missed night. This was the entire architecture of how my family decided who deserved to be shown up for, and I had never, not once, been on the side of that equation that mattered. I didn't argue. I smiled. I thanked them for the rabbit, and I let them walk out of that room still believing everything between us was fine. But it wasn't. Not anymore. And that night, once they were gone, I stopped smiling, and I started thinking. That night, with my daughter asleep in the bassinet and my husband dozing in the recliner beside me, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I picked up my phone and reread the loan agreement, every clause, every line, and I found it, the acceleration provision my attorney had insisted on all those years ago, the one that let me call the full remaining balance due, immediately, at my sole discretion, if I determined in good faith that the trust behind the loan had been materially broken. I remembered how it had been explained to me at the time. A safety net. Something for if they tried to sell the house without paying me back. Something for a worst-case scenario I never actually expected to happen. I never imagined I'd be using it for this. But I thought about the frosting. I thought about you always make it about you. I thought about my surgeon's voice. We need to move now. And how close had actually been. And for the first time it didn't feel like anger. It felt like arithmetic. Like something finally balancing after 31 years of being unbalanced. If I wasn't family enough to matter in an emergency, I wasn't family enough to keep quietly funding a house I'd almost died the same week I didn't get to see it again. So the next morning, still in a hospital gown, still with an IV taped to the back of my hand, I called my attorney. I read him the clause. I asked him plainly, do I have grounds to use this? He asked careful questions. About what had happened. About what we'd signed. And then he told me yes, but it needed to go through the proper legal channels to hold up. 2 days later, a formal notice went out by certified mail. 45 days. Pay the remaining balance in full, refinance, or find another arrangement, before the recorded lien became a legal problem they couldn't undo. I want to be honest about something. This was never really about the money. We could have survived without ever seeing that $47,000 again. Part of me had actually been ready to let it go quietly, as an expensive lesson about who my parents really were. What changed wasn't the money. What changed was realizing that the scale I'd spent my whole life trying to balance had never actually existed. There had only ever been one side of it, and mine wasn't on it. The notice reached them 4 days later, and the response was immediate. My mother called screaming. She used the word betrayal more times in that single phone call than I think she'd used in her entire life, directed at anyone. My father sent a long message accusing me of trying to destroy the family, over what he called hurt feelings, of being vindictive, of proving once and for all that I did make everything about myself. I let both calls go to voicemail. When I finally called my mother back 2 days later, my voice came out calm, calmer than I expected, and that calm seemed to unsettle her more than shouting ever could have. You had 90 minutes to spare for a bakery order. I told her, the night I had serious complications during surgery. I'm not being vindictive. I'm recognizing that the trust that loan was built on doesn't exist anymore. You have 45 days. I am done being the daughter who funds a family only qualified to be part of when it's convenient. She tried something softer then. We didn't realize it was that serious. You should have made it clearer. I told you it was an emergency C-section, I said. I don't know what clearer sounds like. Silence. And then quietly, almost to herself, your sister needed us. That sentence told me everything. It wasn't that they hadn't understood how serious it was. It's that they understood, and they still chose her. Every time they would still choose her. My father tried to enlist the rest of the family to pressure me into backing down. An aunt called to suggest I was acting out of postpartum hormones, a phrase that managed to dismiss me on about 4 different levels at once. I told her, evenly, that I'd nearly died in surgery while my parents attended a party, and if she wanted to discuss hormones, she was welcome to call my surgeon directly. My sister sent one text, "Thanks for ruining everyone's week over drama that has nothing to do with me." Proof that she'd learned exactly the lesson our parents spent 30 years teaching her. That my needs were background noise, something to be managed, not addressed. At a family cookout weeks later, an aunt cornered me by the drink table and told me that families are supposed to handle things privately. That involving a bank made me practically a stranger to them. I asked her if she'd been in the room the night my surgery turned dangerous. She hadn't. I asked if she knew what my surgeon told my husband afterward, word for word. She didn't. Then, I said, "You're missing the part of the story that actually matters." And I walked away, before she could find an answer for that. A month later, my sister called me directly. The first time since the hospital. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. She wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling because her fiance's family had backed out of covering part of the wedding, and she wanted to know, tentatively, testing the water, whether my husband and I could help. Just this once, and for a second old habits nearly answered for me. The reflex of the daughter who fills every gap in this family without ever being asked to. The one who says yes before she's even finished thinking about it. But my voice came out steady instead. "I went through serious complications the night you needed cake frosting more than you needed me in a hospital. I love you, but I'm not the emergency fund anymore. Not for you, not for anyone in this family." She hung up without saying goodbye. I didn't chase the call. I didn't send a follow-up text softening it. For the first time in my life, letting silence sit between me and my sister didn't feel like failure. It felt like the first honest boundary either of us had ever actually respected. And it didn't stop there. A month after that, my mother tried to organize a reconnection dinner, framed like a fresh start, a chance for everyone to move forward. I didn't go. When my niece was born, I sent a card, because that baby hadn't chosen any of this, and she deserved better than inheriting a grudge that was never hers. But I didn't visit the hospital, and I wasn't added back into the family group chat that had clearly kept going without me. No dramatic scene, no slammed doors, just distance, quiet, deliberate, and mine to keep. Because here's what I finally understood. A boundary isn't something you announce once and defend forever in shouting matches. It's something you hold, calmly, every single time the old pull tries to drag you back into place. And the pull never fully goes away. It just gets easier to say no to. I never reversed the acceleration, faced with a recorded lien and no easy way around it. My parents refinanced the house through a new lender, at worse terms than they'd have gotten years earlier, and paid the note off in full over the next 2 months. It wasn't comfortable for them. I know it strained their budget in ways they complained about to anyone who'd listen, and I felt something when I heard that. But it wasn't guilt, it was relief. Quiet, steady relief, at no longer being financially tethered to people who had shown me, in the moment it mattered most, exactly how little that tether meant to them. My mother has called several times since. Some calls are apology, some are accusation. It depends entirely on her mood that day, and I've stopped trying to predict which one I'm going to get. My father sent one message months later that came closer to actual reflection than anything before it. Just a few lines. "I know we let you down that night. I don't know how to fix it. I haven't answered it yet. I might someday. Not because the debt's been repaid. That ledger closed the moment the wire transfer went through. This is a different kind of ledger. A slower one. One that doesn't get settled with a phone call from a hospital bed, and maybe doesn't get settled at all. Maybe it just gets revisited carefully when I'm ready, if I'm ever ready. For now I let the message sit. Unanswered isn't the same as unread, and it isn't the same as closed either. It's just honest, which for this family might be the most unfamiliar thing of all. At my 6-week checkup, my surgeon asked how I was healing. Then, almost as an aside, while flipping through my chart, she said something I've held onto ever since. That night stuck with me. We don't always find out how these stories end once patients leave the hospital. I hope whatever needed to change around you changed. I told her it had. She nodded. The way people do when they've seen enough hard nights to recognize the shape of one finally closing, and moved on, without making it a bigger moment than it needed to be. 30 seconds, maybe, and it stayed with me longer than almost anything my own parents said to me that entire year. My daughter is 7 months old now, and when I'm holding her at 2 in the morning, feeding her in the quiet dark, I make her a promise I've never said out loud. She will never have to compete with a bakery order for my attention in an emergency. If she is ever on an operating table, I will move heaven and every scheduled thing on my calendar to be there. Because that's what the word family is actually supposed to mean, not what I spent 31 years mistaking it for. I spent 3 decades believing that if I just gave enough, the people who raised me would eventually give it back in the same currency. What I learned instead is simpler and harder. Some people will only ever meet you halfway, if the other half costs them nothing. And the moment it does cost them something, you find out exactly where you rank. I don't say that with the bitterness I might have said it with a year ago. I say it now the way you'd describe the weather. A fact. Something you've simply learned to dress for. I still send my parents a photo of my daughter now and then. I don't want her growing up entirely without them. And some doors are worth leaving cracked, even after you've stopped waiting for anyone to walk back through them on your terms. But the version of me who would drain her own savings twice, who would drive 2 hours for a laptop and get nothing back but a passing nod. She stayed behind in that hospital room. What walked out instead was someone who finally understood being the strong one was never a compliment. It was a job nobody ever asked if I wanted. So here's what I keep coming back to. If the people who are supposed to show up for you the most only show up when it costs them nothing, were they ever really there for you at all? Or were they only ever there for what you could give them? So that's the story. A bakery order. A hospital room nobody from my own bloodline walked into until the danger had already passed. $47,000 sounds like the headline, but it was never really about the money. It was about the moment I found out what that money had actually been buying me all along. Not love, not a place at the table, just usefulness. And the second I stopped being useful in the way they wanted, the mask came off. I don't tell this story looking for sympathy. I tell it because I know I'm not the only one who's spent years being the strong one. The fixer, the one who shows up, who forgives, who explains away the empty chair one more time. If any part of this sounded familiar to you, that's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And patterns only break when someone finally decides they're allowed to stop absorbing them. You don't owe anyone a lifetime of proof that you deserve to be shown up for. Not your parents, not your siblings. Not anyone who's only ever met you halfway when it cost them nothing. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're just the first honest sentence some relationships have ever heard. Thanks for listening.